Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cordamt and today we will be discussing Mr. Abelard. We're gonna go over his level up decisions, we're gonna go over his items, his role in the party and all of that good stuff. So, if you haven't seen it in the previous videos, I went over the party game plan, which I can just do a brief summary on this one as well. I have went over Cassia and Idira as well as our main starting point to get our snowball rolling. So now, we're going to discuss Abelard here. So, as that brief summary, I wanted to mention that my game plan for this playthrough of Rogue Trader consisted, after starting to get like the second archetype, it was mostly a strategy of not allowing the enemy to play. We would play first by manipulating initiative with Cassia, for example, or officers with the Grand Strategist.
Does something trouble you,
Is his name?
Lord Captain?
I forget. It is. We would act first, give turns to somebody else, like for example Idira, generate a bunch of momentum, trigger heroic acts, and then once you start getting heroic acts going, the ball just keeps on getting larger and larger, and you can do a lot of damage to your enemies, if not even just kill them all on the first turn of combat. So, for Abelard, I would say he is not, you know, a crucial piece in that puzzle. What he is one of the enforcers. So let's say he might not be the one to generate a lot of momentum early or give us extra turns, stuff like that, but if we want to get in and start killing enemies, Abelard plays a very good role. So his role for the initial portion of the game, the way I played him, was more of a defensive role. He was mostly my frontline tank. He was the one who was going to grab the attention of the enemies, pin them down. If they wanted to move, they would have to take an attack of opportunity, prevent them from shooting their ranged weapons, all that stuff. While being a heavily defensive character, we took a lot of early defensive options on him, on the warrior. And then, once we started getting into the Arch-militant, which was my second archetype of choice, I think this is like the more powerful one, we also started to switch a little bit more on the offensive side of things. Because Abelard made for a very, very sturdy frontline tank early in the game. This is still true for the remainder of the game, but he then also starts getting access to a lot of offensive power as well. So, his roles, initially, more of a tanky character, take the attention of the enemy so they don't go for my backline, interrupt them, mess up their formations, and then, once we start getting into more Arch-militant, he is also one of my main offensive powers. So let's get started here. We start as a warrior. He is the first companion you pick up, and one of my favorite ones as well in terms of personality, and also voice actor. I like him a lot. So charge. He starts with charge. The warrior moves in a straight line and launches a melee attack against any target in the warrior's path. This attack does not count toward the limit of the warrior's attacks per turn. There must be at least 2 free cells between the warrior and the target to use charge. Initially, early on especially, this is kind of your bread and butter. This, if you use it properly, will allow you to get 1 more attack per turn, which normally you do not have access to early in the game, but this will allow that. It also acts as free movement points, let's say, because you do get movement with the charge, even if you have no more movement points left. So, I would say a correct utilization of this skill is one of the most important things to not dominate. To understand and become proficient with early in the game. If you can do it, your warriors will be a lot more useful. As for the previous ones, I'm not going to go into my skill checks too much. Let's just say I made him my athletics guy because it seemed like the best one. And I also want to mention another exception here, which is Carouse. So Carouse is based on toughness. This, for the most part, would just be a skill check like any other, but some items actually scale with this stuff. So if you look at this piece of armor, which I'm going to get into later, don't worry about it too much, just know that this base armor gives us Carouse divided by 10 deflection. So by having Carouse at 140, I am getting 14 deflection out of this piece of armor. That is a lot. So, it is worth noting that if you want to go for heavy armor, Carouse is a good option. Okay, let's go back into our archetypes here. So yeah, athletics was his main skill check. Endure, this is the most important one you can pick on the warrior in my opinion in terms of defensive options. Until the warrior's next turn, all incoming damage is reduced by the warrior's toughness bonus divided by 2 and the warrior gains temporary wounds. So it's essentially like getting a bunch of deflection right here, which early in the game you don't really have too much access to. So by having high toughness, this will make you more durable, as the name suggests. Very useful throughout the entire game. I would start pretty much all of my turns just by casting Endure to make sure that Abelard is safer when the enemies are acting. On rank 4, I took Daring Breach. The warrior immediately restores all... sorry, I didn't take it. I keep forgetting. This is the Heroic Act. It's also one of the best Heroic Acts in the game. The warrior immediately restores all AP and MP and gains agility point MP until the end of the turn. They do not lose MP after performing attacks, very important. The warrior has no limit on melee weapon attacks this turn as well. So this is why it's one of the most powerful heroic acts in the game. Because typically once you attack, you lose your movement points and you have a certain amount of attacks per turn. However, if you have this, you no longer have a limit. And as I've mentioned, for example, with Idira, Idira and Cassia, you have ways of giving your allies a lot more action points than their regular amount. So you can actually use a Daring Breach with a lot of action points available, do a lot of damage, a lot of attacks. You can kill a lot of people with this. It really is a very, very good heroic act to have. Rank 4 as well, very important one also, Thick Skin. The warrior gains +1 damage deflection. Their parry chance is increased by 25% of the warrior's total armor. So, getting more parry based on your armor is good because at least I wanted Abelard to be a more armored guy, not really a nimble, dodgy guy. I went for armor. And more deflection just makes you take less damage overall. Now, 1 damage deflection is not going to make much of a difference in the end game, but it helps out a lot in the early and early mid game. It also works together with Endure and some other things we're going to pick, so I think it's a very nice pick early on. Rank 5, Hardened Scars. You have to have Endure. Whenever the warrior is hit while under the Endure effect, their damage deflection is increased by 1 until the warrior's next turn. Also perfect, because again, if you are out in the open, because sometimes that's what you have to do as a warrior, you're not safe behind cover like, for example, a sniper, you might get shot a bunch of times. And what this means is, by having something like Endure and something like Thick Skin, this means that all the damage you take is reduced. So you can actually take a couple of hits. And the more you take, the less you are going to take from future attacks. This just makes you even more tanky. Very good skill to also have available to you. I took Toughness. My primary stats are going to be Toughness and Strength, for the most part, as well as Weapon Skill to a certain degree. This works well with everything we've taken so far, and, you know, it's just useful to the entire game for more HP, for skills, for scaling of skills. So, Toughness and Strength are the main ones, as well as Weapon Skill. On rank 6, I go for Sworn Enemy. The warrior marks a target, gaining 26% armor, this is based on toughness, again, so scales, and plus 15 damage on melee attacks against that target. 15 is based on strength. If the target attacks the warrior during this round, the warrior gains plus 1 AP once per round. So, more action economy. You get better defenses against high priority targets or dangerous targets, and you also deal more damage to that target. So, this is kind of a one skill do everything to have available on Abelard. It is very, very useful throughout the entire course of the game as well. More athletics. Here I go for weapon skill because this will affect your parry chance and also reduce the chance that the enemy will parry your attacks. As a melee character, you don't want your attacks to be parried because if they are parried, all damage gets negated. So by having more weapon skill, you prevent enemies from parrying as usually as they do. On rank 7, I took Do Not Falter. I'm going to read this one. I'm going to mention right now that I would not pick this anymore. I'll explain why. All allies affected by Brace for Impact do not suffer the negative effects of melee superiority for the entire combat. What this means is, in melee combat, any target surrounded by more allies than enemies receives a plus 10 weapon skill bonus for each additional ally. Larger creatures need to be surrounded by more than 2 enemies to provide this advantage to the attackers. So, melee superiority is something that you do not want to have Abelard suffering from. Because like I mentioned, if you are playing with a backline and not just a bunch of warriors, typically you're going to have your backline behind cover and Abelard is going to be kind of exposed in the middle of the battlefield hitting enemies. And that means it's going to be easy for him to get surrounded. And if you get surrounded, you suffer from melee superiority, which means you are going to receive a penalty to your weapon skill bonus. You're going to start parrying less and less, making you more and more vulnerable. Now, the way this works is, Abelard has an origin skill, which is Brace for Impact, and Do Not Falter is going to apply this immunity to all of the allies affected by it. But it does not affect Abelard himself. This was something that I expected to work that way. It doesn't. Since Abelard does not benefit from this, I would no longer take this skill. At least not this early on. I would take something different that I took later. I think it's Combat Master or something. I will discuss it when we get there. So I would not take this here. I would take something different. More Medicaid just for healing purposes. Ramming speed, increased charge distance by 3 cells, like I mentioned. Early on, charge is one of your main tools to get more damage in, to get more movement. So just increasing the distance just makes you more mobile, and I think that's a good choice. Daring Breach, upgrade number 3. For 1 round, the warrior becomes the priority target of every enemy hit by their melee attacks. Also, the warrior gains plus 20% parry and 2 deflection until the end of combat. So early, I picked this one mostly for the defensive properties here. So more parry, more deflection, you are just sturdier overall. And as a bonus, if you hit somebody, you will become the priority target. So this falls into the role of keeping my backline safe and keeping the attention on Abelard instead of my more squishy targets. Very good upgrade. Disarm. When the warrior uses a single shot attack or a melee attack against a target, the warrior gains 21% armor against attacks made by a target for 1 round. And this is based on toughness yet again. So, more defensive options to keep Abelard safe. We want him to be sturdy. More weapon skill, more parry. Taunting Scream. Again, taking the attention of enemies. The warrior screams at their enemies to draw their attention and becomes a priority target of any enemy who fails a willpower resistance test. You can make this resistance test harder on him or harder on them by applying debuffs from somebody like, for example, Cassia or Idira. So, also a very useful one. It affects a very large area. You can normally taunt a bunch of enemies with just 1 cast of this. Also very useful to keep them pinned on Abelard and not going for the backline. Dueling Master, plus 15% bonus to parry. Just keep him safer in melee. Strength, Carouse, as we've mentioned. Strength means you get to use heavier weapons and you also deal more damage with your melee weapons. Rigorous Training. The warrior becomes incredibly deft. Charge and slash do not end the warrior's movement and grant 14% dodge for 1 round. This is based on agility. This is not the main purpose I'm going for, because I also don't have a lot of agility. It is mostly for this property here. When you charge, typically, you charge at someone and then you lose your movement points, but now it no longer ends the movement. So you can move after charging, which can be very, very useful as well. Next up, more strength, and I went for heavy armor proficiency. At this point, I had already found some pieces of armor that gave me a lot of deflection. And like I said, early on, deflection is very good. It's good the entire game, but especially early on. And it couples very well with the other talents that the warrior has. So I had some heavy armors. I liked the defensive properties of them. So I went for this proficiency, which from this point onward, I was always using heavy armor, just to make myself even more durable. And finally, Daring Breach upgrade number 2. Until the end of combat, the warrior gains plus 4 MP for each kill, and may use their MP after attacking or using abilities. This is also what makes Abelard, or a warrior let's say, able to chain kills together very, very often. So, you use your heroic act, you have no limit on attacks, you go to somebody, you kill them, you move to somebody else, you kill them, and every time you kill, you get more movement points to reach your next enemy. Just gives you a lot of mobility, just allowing you to keep chaining those skills together. Very, very useful. I like these ones a lot. So upgrade 2 and upgrade number 3. Next one, I went for the Arch-militant. I could have gone for the Vanguard, I think that's the name, because the Vanguard is the more defensive and tanky approach for a character. I believe Abelard would also be good as a Vanguard, but it also felt to me that the Vanguard would mostly benefit of having an officer archetype. So I prefer to go for the Arch-militant, especially because Arch-militant I think is extremely strong. And once you start getting points in here, this is where the shift starts happening for a more offensive role as well. So the main purpose of Arch-militant, whenever the Arch-militant uses an attack that is of a different type from their previous attack, the Arch-militant gains a stack of versatility. We're going to look at what those are. Valid attacks are single shot, single target melee attack, area melee, area shot, or burst. The Arch-militant gains +3 weapon skill and ballistic skill for every stack of versatility. If the Arch-militant has 4 or more stacks of versatility, the Arch-militant deals an additional 10 plus weapon skill bonus or 10 plus ballistic skill bonus % damage, whichever is highest. This is a very nice way to increase your defenses because you get to parry more, decrease the enemy defenses because the more weapon skill you have, the less they parry. It will also increase your ranged power because you can use Abelard as someone that goes into melee but also shoots weapons. So I really think that Arch-militant is a very, very powerful and also very, very fun archetype to use. And like I was saying, you get the stack of versatility for using different attacks in every round. And you have access to these in many ways. You can shoot a pistol in melee, you can kick somebody, you can do a single target melee, you can do a an area attack with a melee weapon as well, you can burst. You have a lot of options to increase versatility. And the more you have, the better you'll be. So Arch-militant, that's kind of the key functional aspect of it. My first pick on rank 2 was kick. This might seem like an underwhelming skill, but I'm gonna try and explain why it's not. The Arch-militant makes a melee attack with a kick dealing 21 damage, this is based on toughness and strength, instead of weapon damage. This attack does not count towards attack limit per turn and counts as a single melee attack for the purposes of versatility. It cannot be parried and it will push the target 2 cells away. So, why is this so good? 1 second please. Sorry, I had to answer Cordampina. The reason why this is so good is it deals decent damage. It's not going to deal tremendous amounts of damage, but trust me that this can scale up as you get some other bonuses. It deals damage. It only costs 1 AP. It does not count toward the attack limit per turn. That's like the main purpose of this. So it's kind of like a free attack as long as you have AP, which we have multiple ways of generating more AP. It cannot be parried, so you don't have to worry about losing this attack. And it will push somebody away. So the push is not so important for yourself, although you can push people against other enemies and knock them down, stuff like that. But I guess the main bonus of this is if one of your allies is getting threatened, like for example your sniper or your officer, stuff like that, you can just reach in with Abelard and kick them away, freeing your ally to, you know, be able to move or shoot without having to worry about being in melee with another enemy. It counts as extra attacks, that means more versatility per turn, and like I said, you want to get as much versatility as possible, as quickly as possible. And this allows for all of that. It is a very versatile skill that's useful for the entire game as well. Rank 3, always ready. I think this is the best one you can get very early on the archetype. You begin combat with 2 stacks of versatility. This will just empower you or give you a tempo boost in what you are doing with the rest of your Arch-militant skills. You just start off with 2 stacks. Stage superiority. This is also quite good. Until the end of combat, the Arch-militant can make 1 additional attack each turn. This is the heroic act, by the way. Including 1 additional attack on a turn this heroic act was used. The first attack after using this ability and each turn afterward costs 0 AP. This is amazing. You get an extra attack every single turn. This extra attack costs 0. It will also build stacks of versatility. It just works very, very well. And with the upgrades, this is even better. AP increase, awesome. Getting some more strength. Rank 6, dependable. The Arch-militant gains a +5 plus number of stacks of versatility bonus to armor. This bonus is kept if you are using cautious approach or confident approach. So again, going for the purpose of being tanky, this will give us more armor based on our versatility. Very good skill. Weapon skill, once again. Wildfire on rank 7. The Arch-militant next attack this turn will cost 0 AP, will not count toward attack limit per turn. The cost of this ability is reduced by 1 for every 4 stacks of versatility to a minimum of 1 AP. I think this was nerfed. I think before this could cost 0. But even if that's the case, it's still a good option to have, because you have multiple attacks that cost more than 1 AP. If you are using heavy weapons, for example, a burst can cost 3 AP. If you are using an area attack with a heavy weapon, it will cost, I think, 2 AP. So this will just allow you to get more action economy. And again, does not count toward attack limit. More versatility, more attacks per turn. What else can you need? It will not die, giving you more wounds, making you tankier. Arms Master. Killing an enemy with a melee attack makes all the Arch-militant's range attacks this turn cost -1 AP to a minimum of 1, and vice versa. Does not stack. I did not end up using this as much as I wanted, because I ended up using mostly just heavy two-handed weapons. I didn't bother too much with ranged weapons. But if you do like having ranged weapons as well, this is a very nice way of making them work, because typically a burst costs 2 AP, or some other important attacks cost 2 AP, but like this, it will cost you only a single point, just more action economy overall. If you are only using two-handed hammers or swords or stuff like that, then I would say you don't need to bother with this one. Although it can be useful, because sometimes you've spent all of your movement points, but you still have more AP for attacks. You can make use of a ranged weapon. If you only have melee weapons, that goes to waste. Combat Master. This is what I wanted to pick up on my Warrior tree instead of Do Not Falter. Enemies gain no melee superiority bonuses against this character. That's what's important here. You don't want to get the penalty from this. This makes Abelard a lot safer. Adaptability. Gaining a stack of versatility increases critical hit chance by 5% until the end of the turn and stacks. So, it's only until the end of the turn, but as you've seen, we have many different sources of extra attacks, of gaining more versatility. So this means we can stack this up to very high amounts. Very useful if you want to crit people, which typically you do. Athletics, strength. Upgrade number 4. The Arch-militant can use both the heroic act of the Arch-militant archetype and the heroic act of the warrior or soldier archetype in a single combat. This is also amazing, because as I've mentioned, the heroic act of the warrior is one of the best in the game, and this allows you to use both of them. Because typically, you can only use one heroic act regardless of the archetype. Even if you have 2 archetypes, you can only use one heroic act per combat. This allows you to have 2. Very nice. More carouse. Critical versatility. The Arch-militant gains a +5 plus number of stacks of versatility bonus to critical damage. This bonus is kept when you are using cautious approach or confident approach. Again, the more stacks you have, the more damage you will deal. Very awesome as well. I took some agility here, probably because I could not take strength or toughness, I imagine, or weapon skill. And you know, it's not completely wasted on him, because he does get movement points based on agility when he uses the warrior heroic act. So it's not too bad. Swift movements, action economy, 2 extra movement points. Reckless Rush, more action economy. You can get 7 movement points for 1 AP, allows you to reach further. And if you have stacks of versatility, the number is increased by 3 until the end of the turn. This might not seem like much of a difference, but sometimes you want to trigger Wildfire, or you just want to deal more damage by having more stacks, and this will give you essentially for free 3 extra stacks for whatever you need. But mostly, I'm thinking this is for the movement points here. That's the main reason why I took this. All out. Improving Reckless Rush. What is this? This is new. Why are you highlighting... Why are you highlighting those things? Because it requires a feature? And these are features? No, it's an ability. I don't know why it's highlighting them, but okay. While under the effect of Reckless Rush, Arch-militant attacks do not spend movement points. So again, if you have this, you don't need to worry about attacking and losing all of your movement points. You can just keep on moving. Very useful as well. More toughness, more carouse, martial art. The target of kick must pass a toughness resistance test with a 26 penalty, this is based on strength, or fall prone for 1 round. Proning enemies is very powerful, because they cannot act, and they also get a penalty to parry and dodge. But it's mostly for disabling them. If they are prone, they cannot fight back. Very nice. More toughness, nimble for extra dodge, just to make me tankier, and then the final upgrade, upgrade number 3, until the end of combat, the Arch-militant attacks do not spend all MP. Additionally, each attack grants attacking plus 5 bonus to dodge for 1 round. So, once again, going for not spending movement points after attacking, and some extra bonus to dodge for defensive purposes. Arch-militant is done. Moving on to Exemplar. In Exemplar, I start by taking Peak Condition. The character gains a bonus to their strength equal to 20% of their maximum wounds. So, if you've been taking points into toughness, and things that give you more wounds, like it will not die, for example, you will have a fair amount of wounds. Which means, if we look at our strength score of 135, we are getting 35 strength simply for having 1 feat on Peak Condition here from the Exemplar tree. Very, very good. We also take Interception. When the warrior parries an attack, their next warrior archetype ability costs -1 AP. Action Economy. Perfect. Athletics. Flash Fire. The cost of Wildfire is reduced by 1 AP for every 3 stacks of versatility instead of 4. This will just enable Wildfire quicker, and we do want to have access to those abilities as quickly as possible. This facilitates that. More Strength. I went for Power Armor Proficiency here because I wanted to try out some Power Armors. It was not needed. I ended up just using basically Heavy Armor. It's not wasted if you want to use Power Armor, but if you don't, then I would say don't take this. Although at this point, you start getting into a situation where the things available for you to choose from are not that important, so you're just taking, you know, whatever has some minor benefit or that you might see yourself wanting to try out. Reckless Strike, this is from the warrior as well. The warrior's next melee attack gains 65% armor penetration and 26 damage and ignores 18% of the target's parry. This is based on strength, and weapon skill. So all things you want to have as high as possible. Every enemy who survives an attack enhanced by this ability will attack the warrior in return, including creatures with ranged weapons. So you could have picked this early on the warrior archetype. The reason why I don't is because the main purpose of Abelard early is to be tanky. It's not to be very offensive. And early, this is quite bad. Every time an enemy survives the attack, it will fight back and hit Abelard. So early, you don't want this. Late, you actually want this. You want to be attacked. Because there are some items, and I guess I can show this item right now so this makes sense. There are some items, like these boots over here. Whenever the wearer parries an attack, they immediately strike back at the attacker. So, by having people attack us back, it gives us more chances to parry, which in turn gives us more chances to attack them back. And also, from another feat we took earlier, every time we parry, our next ability is gonna cost 1 less. So, it just plays out very, very well as a very nice synergy to have. And, you know, let's not forget about the increase in armor penetration and damage and all that. Okay, this is also very good. But this is not a downside at this stage in the game. This is a benefit. More athletics. Extermination. Any damage the character deals is increased by 1 for every attack they have made this combat. Does not affect damage over time effects like bleeding, burning, or toxin. The more you attack, the more your damage goes up. Quite good. I would say it's not as good on Abelard as it is, for example, on someone like Argenta. Because Abelard, using heavy weapons, like a two-handed hammer or a sword, your base damage is already quite high. So getting an increase of 1 is good. Let's not pretend it is good, and especially because it stacks, but it's better for someone like Argenta. Because Argenta, if you are using burst weapons on her, or I guess even burst weapons on Abelard if you are using them, burst weapons don't do a lot of damage, but they fire very often. So every little increase of static increase in damage, not percentage, but static increases in damage for weapons that fire very frequently, high bursts of a lot of shots per turn, it benefits them a lot more. So it's very good for Abelard, it's even better for Argenta, which we also take on her. Accustomed to Glory. Whenever the Arch-militant or their ally uses an heroic act or a desperate measure, the Arch-militant gains +1 and 10% damage on all attacks until the end of combat. Our game plan, as I've mentioned, is to obtain heroic acts very early, so this will trigger quite quickly. More weapon skill, Clenched Teeth. The warrior gains 8 damage deflection against the first attack made by every enemy this combat. You can take this earlier as well. This is based on your toughness characteristic score. Why is this so important? Because I'm pretty sure that the only times, or most of the times that Abelard went down in my playthrough, was if he got attacked before he had a chance to act. Because if I have a chance to act, I am gonna buff up with Endure, I am gonna buff up with Sworn Enemy, I am gonna prepare, I'm gonna go behind cover, yada yada yada. I can defend myself, right? But if you haven't acted yet, you haven't been able to set up your defenses. So without Endure, he will take a lot more damage than otherwise, and that's when he usually goes down quite frequently. This helps you mitigate that, because it's only against the first attack made by every enemy this combat, so it's only for that one time, but what we are trying to do with this is buy time until we get to our turn in order to not get killed before we can actually set up our defenses. I took it here because I didn't really have much else that I saw as a lot of benefit. You can take this much sooner. So, for example, instead of Do Not Falter, this could have been taken. Confident Approach. I like this one. I didn't end up using it as much as I wanted, because I took this quite late in the game, and I didn't really feel like it was very necessary. The Arch-militant gains a Confident Approach effect until the end of combat, until this ability is used again, or until you use Cautious Approach. Instead of usual bonuses from versatility, the Arch-militant gains 3% dodge reduction and parry reduction, and ignores 3% of enemy cover for every stack. This part is mostly for the parry reduction. All the Arch-militant attacks score critical hits. This is awesome, but the Arch-militant's critical damage on those attacks is reduced by half. If the Arch-militant already has 4 or more stacks of versatility, your attacks always deal maximum damage as long as the Arch-militant keeps the Confident Approach effect active. So, maximum damage, what this means is your weapons will have a minimum damage and a maximum damage. This will ensure that you are always rolling the highest amount possible. And I guess the main benefit here is you are always critically hitting. And if you have a lot of bonuses to increase your critical damage, this reduction by half might not be that bad. Although I will say that I don't find this to be a necessary thing to pick. I think you could pick whatever you wanted here from the Arch-militant. I took this mostly to try it out. I used it once or twice. It didn't make much of a difference, I think. I might be misjudging this, okay? I didn't use it a lot, so I can't really, guarantee that it's very good or very bad. Let's just say I did not test with this one enough, but I don't think it's necessary to have it. More strength, calm and steady. While under the effect of Confident Approach, the Arch-militant keeps half of the usual bonus on versatility. This was just to try and improve this one, because again, I don't have a lot to pick at this stage. Dual weapon combat. The character can attack with a second weapon in their current weapon set in addition to the usual one attack per round. This attack suffers 20 penalty to weapon skill and ballistic skill and costs 1 AP more. So at this stage in the game, you have so much weapon skill and ballistic skill, especially through versatility, that this is not going to bother you too much. The AP might, but if you are someone that enjoys using two weapons in a weapon set, like a sword and a pistol, for example, this will give you an additional attack per turn. I wanted to try it out. I didn't end up using it too much, but again, not much else to pick. Carouse, Steel Shell. The character's deflection is doubled against single target attacks. So we have a lot of deflection, and if somebody targets us with a single shot or a single melee attack, we double the deflection. This is very good. Why not take it? AP increase, Desolation. The warrior's melee attacks deal an additional 4 damage to enemies that have no allies in adjacent cells. This is based on agility, so it's not going to scale too much, sadly. With lack of other choices, this is a minimal benefit. I took it. Impetus. The damage dealt by charge is increased by 21 when the ability is used from a distance of 5 or more cells. This is based on toughness and strength. Cool damage increase. I mean, we like charged to get extra attacks, so more damage on them is always a benefit. Blood Haze. As long as the Arch-militant has killed at least one enemy with a melee attack this round, the Arch-militant gains a 14% bonus to dodge. This is based on agility again, so it doesn't scale as much as possible, but it is still a benefit. And then Destroyer. Every melee attack the character makes reduces the target's armor by 13%, this is based on strength, until the end of combat. This reduction is applied before damage is calculated, and it also stacks. This is something I would only take more towards the late game, because as I mentioned, early in the game, enemies might have some armor, but it's never really enough to bother you too much. You can easily overpower it by a multitude of different ways. But when you start getting into the late stage of the game, you will find some enemies, especially boss enemies or very sturdy enemies, that will have a tremendous amount of armor. And when they have a lot of armor, Abelard deals less damage, and especially Argenta or anybody using burst weapons will basically deal no damage. So having a way to reduce this is always very, very desirable. So every attack reduces it. As we've seen, we have a lot of attacks per round. We can reduce the target's armor by a very large amount in a single turn. Open engagement. If there are no enemies adjacent to the warrior at the start of the turn, the warrior's damage is increased by 26 for 1 melee attack. A minor bonus. Discipline. You get 1 cycle versatility whenever an ally grants Arch-militant an extra turn. It's a minor benefit as well. Contempt for the Weak. You deal 20% critical 20% more critical damage against targets that are stunned, prone, or blinded. You can prone with your kick. You have weapons that prone as well, such as the one that I am using. You can stun people with Cassia. You can stun people with weapons as well. You can blind them with Idira. So this makes sense for my current party setup. Very nice, more damage. And then Power Weapon Expert, simply because I am using a power weapon. Why not take it? 10% more armor penetration. With this said, let's look at our characteristics over here and then also go over our items. So, as you can see, most of our stats are attributed to the physical portion of the characteristics. We are not really doing anything with intelligence, perception, willpower, or fellowship because we don't care about this on Abelard. We want strength as high as possible. We want a decent amount of weapon skill until you feel that you are not being parried too much. And honestly, once you get stacks of versatility, this goes up by so much just for the stacks that you don't need this to be very, very high. But it is still good to have a certain amount. My defensive stats over here, as you can see, we have 18 deflection, which is quite high. We have 90% armor, also very good, and 92% dodge. So quite well defended in my opinion. I didn't really have trouble keeping Abelard alive in the end game. Well, I guess mostly because the enemies were not being allowed to act, but when they were allowed to act, I always felt safe on Abelard. A lot of the times he didn't even take any damage from attacks. He can become very, very sturdy. He also has 95% parry chance. Let's look at the items. I have the self-calibrating helmet. The wearer's successful single attacks inflict stun on a target for 1 round if the target fails a willpower resistance test with the -5 penalty. If the wearer attacks a stunned enemy, the nearest enemy becomes stunned as well. This is awesome. Disabling enemies when you attack. Perfection. And as you notice from our feat selections, if you are hitting somebody that's stunned, you will deal more damage. So works out very well. The Tempest's Elite Carapace. Heavy armor gives you 80% armor, 3 armor deflection by default, which is not a lot, but it will give you more deflection based on your Carouse skill, which we do have a lot of. So just from this one, we're getting 14 extra deflection, which is quite high. And it also gives you 30% more dodge. This was the best armor I found for him. Cruciatum Litany. Each of the wearer's single attacks gain 10% damage for each negative effect on the target. We do get a lot of negative effects on the targets based on our characters here. We have a lot of debuffs. This will just deal more damage. I'll leave the weapons for later. I took Fury Incarnate. Whenever the wearer is under the effects of Reckless Rush, all wearer's attacks gain 50% critical hit chance, the wearer gains 50% critical damage, and all attacks against the wearer gain 50% critical chance, and the wearer suffers 50% more critical damage as well. So it has pros and cons, but again, we want to kill people as quickly as possible, not allow them to act, and this does just that. And this final option here, it doesn't even matter that much because we are so well defended that if we do get shot or if we do get hit, it gets mitigated by a lot already. So this is not going to make that much of a difference. Next up, we have the Bead of Might. If the wearer has 8 or more AP at the start of their turn, they gain 30% more damage for the rest of the combat. You could give this to pretty much any damage dealing character in your party. I went for Abelard. And this might seem like a lot, it's not really. With buffs from a noble background character, buffs from an officer, buffs from a psyker, buffs from the navigator, you will get so much HP that you can trigger this very, very easily. So it's basically a 30% damage increase by just having this one item. Heavy Lifters gives me 30 strength. That is very strong. If the wearer has not moved the previous turn, their range attacks with heavy weapons deal 50% more damage until the end of the turn. Now, this part here is mostly, in my opinion, if you wanted to go for someone like Argenta, somebody that wants to use heavy weapons, like for example with Burst, such as a heavy bolter, this makes it easier to obtain the prerequisite, because those weapons do require a large amount of strength. And, you know, if you haven't moved, which is something more typical of a ranged character, not a melee character, you are moving all the time, you will deal more damage. This is mostly for the strength increase. I take the Malpian Shroud. Whenever the wearer deals damage with a melee attack, they gain toughness bonus plus 3 times iconoclast level, which Abelard is an iconoclast, temporary wounds. The wielder's melee attacks deal an additional temporary wounds divided by 2 damage. So, generating more temporary wounds, making us even sturdier is very, very good. And we also deal more damage based on them. And if you saw my video for Idira's build, she is able to give characters a lot of temporary wounds, like a lot of them. And even the officers can generate temporary wounds as well. So you can end up with a very large amount of temporary wounds, which will just increase your damage by quite a bit. So very good cloak on him. And the boots, as I showed before, whenever you parry an attack, they immediately strike back at the attacker. This is just free attacks, more action economy. If this attack deals damage, the wearer performs kick to push the enemy away. So you also kick enemies away. This part is... I would prefer this wording here, because I want to keep them close, but it's worth it. When you have this one extra attack over here, it's worth it to have this here. Then... I never use this, by the way, just so you know, but I like the elixirs to increase his strength and weapon skill, or attacks not counting towards attack limit until the end of the turn, which is very strong, especially if you want to go for that alpha strike at the start of the turn and just kill everybody before they can act. Even if you get knocked unconscious afterwards, who cares, because they're all dead. Although, again, I didn't use this, I didn't need to use this during my playthrough. And then some medkits just to help out the party. As for the weapons, my main weapon of choice was Piety's Charge. I think you can just pick whatever strong two-handed weapon you want for more damage. I like the power hammers, they have a lot of armor penetration. They have high base damage as well. They have Thunder Slam, which can hit a bunch of enemies in a large area, even if they are behind you. And you can also shove people away from you with one attack. All collisions caused by the Thunderhammer's pushing attack deal 300% more damage, so if you knock somebody against another enemy or against a wall, they will take 3 times more damage, which is very, very nice. And, more importantly, all targets hit by this Thunderhammer must pass an agility resistance test with a +10 bonus or fall prone. You get a lot of attacks per round, as we saw, so you have a lot of chances to actually knocking people prone. If you knock people prone, they are disabled. This is just an awesome, awesome weapon. The weapon knocks people prone, my helmet stuns people. So not only are we breaking them apart with lots of damage, we are also disabling them in case they survive. My other weapon set, which I didn't end up using too much, I had the auto-striking power sword, decent amount of damage, decent amount of armor penetration. It only has a cleave, not as AoE heavy as the hammer. When the wielder successfully parries with this power sword, they immediately counterattack with whichever weapon costs the least AP. So, free attack again. Very nice. It will also give you a plus 30% bonus to parry, which is a lot. And on a successful hit with this power sword, the target suffers 10 penalty to weapon skill. So, you get extra attacks, so more action economy. You are better defended by having parry, and you are also weakening the enemies by lowering their weapon skill. It is a very good weapon if you want to go for one-handed weapons. And on the offhand, I had the Virtuous Vindication. Again, I didn't end up using this too much. Deals a lot of damage, a lot of armor penetration. On a hit, targets must perform a toughness resistance test with a +10 bonus. If they fail, they start burning and melting. If they melt, they start reducing their deflection and armor. And they're also stunned for 1 turn. So, very, very good weapon as well, even though I mostly was using my hammer here. So, that's it for Abelard. He is not as item dependent as other characters might be, like for example Cassia or especially Idira. Just use whatever improves your defenses and your melee capabilities and you will do fine. I had a lot of success with this particular setup, so I can vouch for it. But whatever you find to be strong and useful for the melee, I think it's a very good choice. So, as always my friends, I want to thank you all for being with me in the channel, watching some Rogue Trader builds, in this case for Abelard. Questions or suggestions, leave a comment below. If you are enjoying the content, consider subscribing for more. Many more videos coming out soon, and I hope to see you all in the next episode. Until then, stay safe everyone.